Welcome to the PI Podcast, Political Insights for the Palaging Inis. I'm your host, Matt, and with me is my co-host, political scientist, meme lord with no approved therapeutic claims, Borge.
Mukha ba akong gamot? PI nyo, PI nating lahat, board share at your service.
Yes, and in this episode, we have a special guest you from a podcast you might recognize from I suppose in the anniversary episode we particularly featured him in the recommendations, but also one of the podcasts that when I first discovered, of course, podcast PH, this is one of the few ones that got my attention because it's quite close to my heart, because his podcast, the Pisara Tales, is about being a teacher. About he features millennial teachers, and today we have him to discuss some teachers' issues, particularly in this day and age, of course, on right now where we're all doing online classes, and especially the importance of the political climate. So, what can teachers do with that? Borge, any impressions or that you perhaps want to talk about the preface before we get our guests on?
No, this would be a very interesting topic again. Issue political education had floated again, tied with voters' education, which I personally believe should be unfettered. So,
Ooh.
but hey, it's probably one way for us to clear ground to establish a concrete notion of political education, civic education to be more specific, beyond voting. So,
Yeah.
relatively excited for this episode.
Mm-hmm. And this reminds us of our first episode, Teaching at the Turning Point, where we talked about us being political science teachers teaching students, college students, about politics.
That's more than a year ago.
It is more than a year ago, yes. And we're in a way revisiting that topic of education, but of course with the perspective of someone thoroughly in education right now, but as well, not necessarily a politics teacher, but eventually, but also talks to a lot of other teachers as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, from the Pisara Tales, we have Sir Jay. Hello, Sir Jay. Say hello to our listeners.
Hello, hello Matt, hello Borge, and
Hello.
hello mga ka-PI. Welcome, thank you for having me. This is Sergey.
Yeah. So it's good that you know the name of our listeners, Kapiay. Yeah. Yeah. So we've actually been listening to each other's podcasts. So
Yeah.
for our listeners, can you tell us why did you start the Pisara Tales, and tell us the origin of your podcast?
Right. So the Pisara Tales is kind of like most podcasts nowadays. It's a pandemic baby. I started it when I was bored out of my mind the first time, like the very first set of lockdowns.
Mhm.
So I think I started it around like late June, early July, something like that. And because I at the time, I just finished my first full school year, right, which was actually cut short in a way because I started teaching 2019, and then that was the school year that I got cut short because of the pandemic. So like our suspension started around March and then never came back again. So I just finished we just finished that particular school year, and I was still feeling the that whole rookie season of being a teacher. So I was looking for stuff to listen to because I've listened to podcasts before, but not as much as I do now because of the whole online setup.
Mhm.
And so I was looking for educational podcasts that are hopefully in the context of the Philippines, because syempre we're Filipinos, and we could learn so much, of course, from Western education, but it would be nice if there was something na fit to our context, no? And I realized that there wasn't any. And every time I would go to iTunes or to Spotify, I would see a lot of US based podcasts on education,
Mhm.
primarily US based. And of course, there's a lot of nuances in US education that we don't have here, or that we're not yet, I guess, at the level of applying here. So I thought, okay, why not start one? And then that's pretty much it. I mean, I know that I could talk for a while, It was shaky at first because it was something else to be creating content. I never thought I would be a content creator, but here I am. So and I at the time of this recording, I we recorded like 55 full episodes and still
Wow.
going. So
Nice.
Nice.
yeah.
Hmm. And so, can you tell us some of the most important things that you learned from the guests? Perhaps things that are important to teachers right now, especially that they are undergoing a lot of changes because we're all right now teaching online. So,
Right.
and of course, affected by a lot of this new milieu, this new environment. So, can you tell us some of the important things that you learned from your guests?
Right. So one particular episode that comes to mind when you gave that question, no, was with Miss De Patillo,
Mm-hmm.
right? So she's actually the mom of my classmate when I was in elementary,
Mm-hmm.
and so she works for Deped actually. So she if I'm not mistaken, she Tita Pearl, she is the school's division office head of, or one of the heads at the school division of QC,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's a pretty, a pretty high position. And of course, I got to know more about the inner workings of DepEd in that sense because I work for a private school. I'm not a public school teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I did not I did not study in a public school growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Though well, technically Philippine Science is a public school, but not DepEd handled.
Mm.
So the nuances of public school education, I didn't know much about, and so that episode with Tita Pearl helped me understand the context of public school education. In terms of I guess a more political episode, if you will, which is actually one of my favorites, and actually one of the most listened to episodes ever
Mm-hmm.
in the podcast, is about neoliberalism. So I had Lakan Umali.
Mm-hmm.
He's someone from UP. He's a sociologist, and he's an instructor as well.
Mm-hmm.
Tapos, yeah, we had a really, really long talk about neoliberalism in education.
Okay.
Basically understanding the context of why our education system is the way it is,
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
why it is driven to produce graduates that are, uh, or that are, what do you call this? Diretsong pang labor force,
Mm-hmm.
where like parang it's labor oriented ang dating ng and profit
Mm.
driven,
Mm-hmm.
whereas in other countries higher education is something that is more more liberal, or something just
Mm.
for para talaga to for knowledge's sake basically,
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
whereas tayo we treat it as like a badge na okay, if you're a college graduate, you have a better chance of getting a job. So
Mm-hmm.
parang ganun yung context, and it all stems from neoliberalism in a sense. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a pretty long it was a pretty long episode, but I really enjoyed it. Sayang
Yeah.
lang na at the time na we recorded it, my like the audio was a bit wonky, but
Mm-hmm.
content matters. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
I think that's a good one to maybe stay for a while. That is one of my personal favorite episodes of your podcast as well. In fact, I know a lot of Lacan, mostly from Twitter actually, but he's a
Yeah.
witty guy. But
Same.
but
But I met him in real life nung ano rin, kasi we had a we had the same teacher in one of our GEs, but we never
mm,
became classmates though. So
okay.
and of course there's a lot of mutual friends considering that whole space in UP. Medyo maliit lang, di ba? Madaling magkakilala kahit na hindi naman naging kaklase. So
Yeah,
yeah.
but for the listeners who don't know quite know what neoliberalism is, can maybe either of you can comment on what liberalism is, and then
Might be better
yeah,
at this because until now I have a general idea, but
right.
I don't want to anger the leftists who might be listening.
Okay
Sure.
lang.
So
Bisitin natin ang mga ano.
no, but
Yeah.
from what I understand is it's very complex, but I only understand it from the context of education, which is
Mm-hmm.
it's one of the main reasons why, like I mentioned, our our higher education is focused towards creating laborers or
Mm-hmm.
creating skilled workers rather than like for example in European universities,
Mm-hmm.
the propagation of knowledge, which is the original purpose of higher education
Right.
universities, 'cause, like they're the ones that are producing
Mm.
knowledge and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Borge, would you
Yeah.
care to
Yeah.
Ano yan?
to add on that? Yeah.
I think in a nutshell, again, neoliberalism as a system or a regime is again tied with the capitalist system.
Yeah.
So
Right.
again, one of the means to feed the system with new workers, may it be skilled or semi-skilled, but to gear education towards providing students with necessary skills and a mindset that will fit again the
To be a
system.
worker,
Yeah,
basically.
to be a worker.
Yes.
And again, I'll give you one example. So, DLSU graduates have been praised as top students that are more resistant to stress, and that is due to our trimestral system. For three
Yeah.
to four years, trimestral system kasi talaga masasanay kang mabilisan ng gawa.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, tsaka nung, I actually felt that when napunta ako sa Shanghai,
Mhm.
bumagal ang mundo ko kasi talagang bumagal siya. So those
Mhm.
are means to, again, the neoliberalism as, again, system of institutions.
And this is an obstacle for us because as we teach, with all due respect to our employers, we do our best to at least cover as many as we can in such a short amount of time. But
Right.
hindi natin kayang well, what do you call that? Nam well, how do you say that? Like
Namnam eh.
get them to
We don't have we don't get to savor it.
Make
yes,
namnam.
make
Make namnam.
Make
nam
them know.
lessons.
Yeah,
Like
parang we would like to have more time, but
Mhm.
we can't,
Right,
and which kind of sucks in a way.
right.
And
Yeah.
also, it affects our students most definitely. Kasi
Mhm.
tayo nahihirapan tayo like how to schedule it, pero sila rin nahihirapan kasi they have to take in so much information at a
Yes.
limited amount of time.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I think just to add on to that one, I think in the Philippines the application of neoliberal principles is not as bad as it is being applied in the West. Because in the
Right.
West, the current complaint right now is the establishment of an academic industry.
Right.
So, imbes na graduate as workers yung mga estudyante, laborer na sila sa loob ng academic industry.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Research assistants,
Dito,
DAs.
dito medyo malakas, in fairness naman, medyo malakas naman ang resistance towards it na,
Yeah,
like, for
may,
example, may, like, may pushback, like, for example, sa UP na, of course, predominantly, most graduates would end up in the corporate, but at the same time, there are graduates who are pushing back, who are really, who are graduates in a sense that they are continuing the whole original idea of university, which is to produce knowledge for knowledge's sake.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And for like the betterment of society, not in a capitalist sense, but of
Yeah.
just a general,
Mhm.
very idealistic
Yeah.
sense.
May ano pa,
Yeah.
may split pa between the academic world here tsaka yung industrial mindset.
Right. And that
Medyo, ewan ko, it's
yeah.
even our universities gearing towards that direction. Sana nga lang hindi magaya sa ibang bansa.
No,
Mhm.
true.
Yeah. I would like to also touch on like what this means for like for what it means to be in education or to educate, because really based on my own readings of a lot of sources of education, ideal education is between two things, mainly indoctrination. Well, they use the word indoctrination, but more or less to have them absorb information, but also critical thinking. And it's a bit of both. You have to have this knowledge and values into you, but at the same time you have to equip them to also be discerning and to critical thinking. So more or less the neoliberal, as as Lacan in your episode puts it, it's mostly towards that, to teach them to be efficient workers with
Yeah.
skills and knowledge, but rather than critical thinking. So I suppose perhaps I can ask, but perhaps maybe each of us to reflect on how we try and balance both in our own teaching life, So yeah, who want to go first?
Sir Jay muna, Sir Jay.
I feel like I would be the worst at it because I
Mhm.
am teaching high school students.
Mhm.
So we are definitely bound by whatever Deped tells us to do in a sense.
Right.
So like for example, like my biggest concern is fitting so many topics, so many science topics
Mhm.
in such a small amount of time. And I could
Mhm.
see it in my students that they're not really absorbing it as well as I would want them to.
Mhm.
Just a bit of context, no, in the school that I work for, which I don't
Yeah.
want to mention the name, not because of legal
Sure.
purposes, but just want to keep them out of it.
Sure.
Well, I teach science. I teach general science basically.
Mhm.
So I teach various high school sections, general science, meaning that I teach everything. I teach
Uh-huh.
all like bio, chem, physics, earth
That's fun.
sci,
Yeah.
which yeah, it's fun, but it also this is it's also disadvantageous because it compresses so many topics
Mhm,
that normally or should like ideally would be
mhm,
given their own individual subjects talaga
mhm,
or their own individual time. Like
mhm,
personally, I'm a chemist
mhm,
by nature and by training, no. So I would
mhm,
be more confident in the chemistry part. But
mhm,
in like our curriculum, in the Deped curriculum, I only have well, in the Deped curriculum, a quarter. But
mm,
buti nga sa amin, like we have like at most a term kasi trimester din kami.
Mm.
mhm,
So and each term is like 2 units worth.
mm,
Ganyan.
mhm,
So parang unit 1 ng term 1 tapos midterms tapos unit 2 and so and
Mm.
finals and then next term. Like right now we're currently starting our term break. So kakatapos lang ng term 1 namin. You
mhm.
know, yesterday was like the deadline for like some of the projects I asked my kids to do.
Right.
But generally I don't have enough time. And so
Mm.
I end up cutting topics
Oh.
as much like even if I don't want to, or I
Mhm,
end up I if not cutting topics, rushing through them
mm.
even like at the back of my head,
Mm.
I know that nobody got this topic.
Oh.
So it pains my heart because like I want to be compliant, of course,
Mhm,
first
Mm.
and foremost. At the same time, I want my students to appreciate science for what it is because I've
mhm,
long accepted that my students, the demographic of the school that I work for, not all
mhm,
of them are into science. And that's
mm,
fine. Because again, not everyone will be into science. But
mhm,
like what I wanted them to understand is like they could appreciate it even if they're not going to be scientists when
mm.
they enter college.
Right.
Mm.
But even then, sometimes hindi feeling ko like I don't get to meet that goal. So,
Mhm.
but you know, we try. We always try, and you know, we'll just keep on trying talaga.
So how do you spice it up then? Because it can be a very cerebral, very technical thing, but
I,
yeah, if you watch the script, yeah,
analogies and
yeah.
like days and days of analogies and hugots and whatever
Who got?
works. Basically, yeah.
I'm curious
Okay,
how to do who got in like
let me give you an
hard science.
example.
Okay, okay.
So one of the topics that I've taught recently is on enzymes.
Mhm,
And so enzymes are proteins that are biological catalysts, meaning that they speed up chemical reactions in the body that would normally take very, very long if they weren't present.
Mm.
And so a characteristic of enzymes is that they can be inhibited, which is our body's way of regulating their function. And
mhm.
there are like various ways of regulating them, and I akin them to relationships wherein
Oh.
some kinds of inhibition would be like okay, meron third party na nang agaw ng
Oh boy.
this is a very like broad generalization of the idea, but if it works, it works. So like I've given them like very corny mnemonics. I've given them
Mm,
very crude representations, which if it will help them understand the topic, I'm taking it. Like
mhm.
yeah, and na-enjoy naman nila so and nagagets nila. So at least there's that.
Yeah. That'd be cool to relate who got with like I mean,
No,
you almost lost me there with all that technology. It's like, oh, relationships, my third party. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. What's any reaction to that?
Mm. Una ka. I am still trying
Hmm.
to sum up my years of teaching, trying
But
to
you know,
find the next specific examples.
it's funny the way that they relate. Well, we try to the way that they see political science is, of course, something that is pre-law and quite technical in itself. So
Right.
I also share with you like the necessity for certain mnemonic devices and acronyms. Like for teaching the parts of the state, we have people, territory, government, and then sovereignty. PTGS, patigas. That's what I use still to that. So yeah, but yeah, it's like I think the fact that both our subjects has science in it kind of turns people off. So perhaps because
But
science tends
I
to
would
yeah.
argue that
Hmm.
they get turned off with my kind of science than your kind of science
Oh
more.
yeah. Well, yeah, yeah, because it's the political that excites them, which is
Yeah,
about
it's the political part that excites them, or like the idea that they could easily see this in real life. I mean, they could as well with the natural sciences, pero politics is just more fun for some people.
Oh. Want to switch
So
places?
yeah,
No,
but you just have to watch the news and it's there. Like we don't even get like 5 minutes of evening news at
yeah.
times. So
Well,
yeah,
yeah, but we don't really teach them to watch the news or how to react
right,
better to the news. We teach them like the scientific method applied to politics.
right.
And so that's one thing that we it is also a challenge, common challenge that in the what we actually teach. And I suppose we could also talk about like how it is to promote scientific thinking among students. Do you think about that? Like, so maybe you can discuss like what to you is scientific thinking and how have you tried to inculcate that, in or maybe yeah, do you observe it in Philippine society right now? Like, are we can we be inclined for scientific thinking or is it like a challenge
And
or
we suck at it. Let's
wow,
put it
blunt.
bluntly.
Okay, okay.
No, kasi whenever I would think about the scientific way of thinking,
Mm-hmm,
it's very methodical,
mm-hmm,
and it's very data driven
mm,
and evidence based,
right.
which is three things that the Philippine society are not really good at,
Oh my. Uh-huh.
like, or at least could be better at the
Mm-hmm,
very least. Because a lot of arguments, especially and I'm sure you know this.
mm-hmm,
Just look at any comment section of any news outlet.
mm,
A lot of the arguments used tend to be more emotional or
mm-hmm,
more driven by I don't know if I'm using the terms right, but like pathos and logos and such. Parang
mm-hmm.
it's very again, hugot. Parang
Yeah.
sa damdamin ng inaatake,
Mm-hmm,
hindi yung nilalaman. And
mm,
so science tends to be more logical. All right, here's the evidence. You know, we know that they literally stole money from
mm,
everyone. We know that they have tortured thousands and thousands of Filipinos, right? So naturally, we shouldn't vote for them because they're the family that allowed these things to happen. And like we've seen them lie to us blatantly for
mm-hmm,
years,
mm,
and yet people still like them because of yung hugot. So
mm-hmm,
in terms of scientific thinking, what I would try to do with my students is that I try to put them in situations that uh, forces them to think.
mm.
And sometimes they don't like it.
Okay.
Because, and because syempre, kasi the examples I would use would be scientific examples, tipong chemistry or physics,
Mm-hmm,
ganyan. Pero kasi I try to keep on reminding them, look,
mm-hmm,
um, I can accept if we don't get the precise value that
mm-hmm,
we're looking for in a particular problem. What I'm more interested in is how you get to the answer that
mm-hmm,
you're supposed to get. Like, I don't care if you're off by like decimal places or whatever, right?
mm-hmm,
But if you do the process right, if you take into what is given to you, analyze it in such a way that, okay, how can I use the given to get to my answer? That is what we're trying to understand here. But again, these are high school kids who couldn't care less, or
oh my.
would see it at face value na, oh my gosh, math na naman, chem na naman. And I hopefully that's still something that right at the back of their head, even if they don't tell me, na ma-realize na, okay, Sir J was actually trying to teach me how to think better. Or parang that would be a good thing to have, na parang just be more scientific and be more
Mm-hmm,
logical, I guess.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you have to be a robot that only
mm,
dispenses data,
mm-hmm,
because data and scientific thinking is useless without the context of humanity.
mm,
I mean, we're still humans.
mm-hmm.
That yung hugot is still important.
Yeah.
We just can't let one take over more than the other. It
Mm-hmm,
has to be a right balance.
And yeah, I do agree with that one regarding scientific. No, I do agree with your assessment that Filipinos are, to an extent, relatively bad with systematic
Yeah.
scientific thought.
scientific thinking.
But for my case, for the past few years, I've been, well, during my first stint as lecturer. So I've been doing this at least unconsciously, but I'm trying to again, as you have said, focus on the method of thinking rather than putting my opinions or advocating for something in the classroom. So I always focus on the method of thinking. Specifically when I started teaching comparative politics. So ang nangyari sa course na yun is that I taught students to how to conduct comparative analysis instead of merely focusing on cases. Kasi usually ganun ang format in other universities.
Yeah.
They would focus on this country, this region, this this cases. So for my case, I focus on methodology just to sharpen their capacity to compare. So you don't end up with similarities and differences. You need to explain shit when you're comparing because
Yeah.
it's child's play to compare and find similarities and differences. Different to conduct comparative politics. But regarding our capacity for scientific thought, I think just a rejoinder to what you said regarding a balance. Recently, again, I started teaching political theory. So I'm not providing an overview of the classics. Indeed, so unlike Matt's expectation that it would be a book club for the classics, I said
You
that
still need that, yeah.
a separate course probably. But
Babasahin mo ng The Prince, ng
Yeah.
Pagkakahal, ng gano'n, lahat na.
yeah. Basically, kasama naman din. Pero I spent the past 2 weeks teaching them how to think systematically. And it's not about establishing a separation between emotions and reason. I told them, if you want to be scientists, you need to put your heart in the right place.
Right.
So it's not separate from logic. It is about loving logic. It's about loving thinking itself. So I'm indoctrinating students not with a specific political doctrine, but with an epistemological one, which is what is the nature of knowledge, the complexity of knowledge.
Yeah.
So truth as something that one cannot absolutely comprehend. And so forth.
If I may, no, before
Yeah.
before I think Matt would say something. Quickly lang, no, before people might think na parang very highfalutin or parang very condescending to, parang sinabi ni Sir Jay. I reckon that most people, especially in this country, don't have the time to quote unquote don't have the time to think. Because we have a mouth to feed. We have mouths to feed.
Yeah.
And that's also emblematic of how rotten the education system is. Yun nga, again, going back to the neoliberalism thing, ang priority ng Pilipino, ng masang Pilipino is, okay, kailangan ko talaga ng trabaho kasi kailangan ko buhayin ng pamilya ko. Wala akong panahon para mag-isip ng kung ano ba ang filosofiya ng ganito ganyan. Because I have mouths to feed. I have priorities. I have bills to pay. I have, it all stems back to our idea of of our capitalist society that we need money and we don't have time for things to think about these things because it's just not going to be a priority and that when you spread that over the whole society na, then that's why we would think kasi tayo, we are privileged enough to have quality college education, maybe even to kayo graduate education. So we're privileged enough to learn more and have the time to think, whereas 90% of the Filipinos probably don't.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah,
definitely.
We need to recognize that. I need to recognize that.
Kaya hindi natin fully masisisi din na bakit bobo tayo sa science. Kasi we've been conditioned to not think about it. We've been told na worry about what you're going to eat for dinner. Worry about how you're going to pay your Meralco or your water bill.
Yeah.
So, yun.
I actually want to talk about that. This is what, well, I remember, like, I suddenly had a flashback about my earliest, like, when people ask me, what do I want to be? I wanted to be like a scientist with parentheses mad scientist, but scientist nonetheless. Because my favorite channel watching growing up was Discovery Channel, and of course you have Bill Nye the Science Guy. You have him explaining like, why are there tornadoes? Why is this color or that color? And it's actually quite fun. But despite being exposed to that, like there are not many people who share this kind of fascination. It can be a fun thing when you actually show it, like, see the magic of science.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, like, where your own like you teach the hard sciences, so more like where that come from, where that experience come from, like interest come from, and why decide to stay as a teacher of hard science, and of course, and how is that in the context of the Philippines. So what is it like being a STEM teacher
Yeah.
in a country that we've already agreed upon
Established na hindi
it's not
masyadong, yeah.
really a scientific country.
It's
So
not
yeah.
conducive to thinking. Let's just
Yeah.
put it that way. It's not
Yeah.
conducive to thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clarify ko lang, no? I don't want to call it hard sciences because social sciences is also hard in its sense. We
Oh,
usually
yeah.
call it by natural sciences or physical sciences. But
Yeah.
anyway, I digress.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, it's a labor of love, I guess,
Uh-huh.
to be a STEM teacher
Mhm.
or a STEM anything in this
Mhm.
country
All right.
that has a science and technology budget less than 1%
Oh
of
boy.
the national budget,
Mhm.
of a country that from the latest TIMS rating, I think we're like the last in science and math in like
Wow.
and yeah, parang I remember talking about it in one of my episodes na in uh, in in a lot of metrics worldwide,
Mhm.
we're either the very last or at the bottom five
Oh.
in terms of science and math. And
Mhm.
so, kasi growing up, the way science and math were taught to students
Mhm.
was very objective,
Mm.
very again logical,
Mhm.
right? But like in a slightly bad way na nawala yung humanity in it. Why would I need to know what X is? Right? Nawala yung context.
Okay.
Ba't ko kailangan
Nawala
Yeah.
yung
kilalanin yung X?
yeah.
Ba't ko kailangan hanapin si
Whereas,
X?
ba't kailangan hanapin si X? Bakit kailangan? Like, why do we need to know all these techniques? Whereas, in everyday life, we do this all the time. Whenever we
Mhm.
would, find, okay, I have 100 pesos. How can I budget this in my meal, for example, for the week
Mm.
Mm.
or for the day or whatever? We use algebra all the time,
Mhm.
but it's framed always in such a way na find X.
Mm.
Very mechanical. And
Yeah.
so
Mm.
kids would tune out.
Mhm.
Pero if math and science were taught in such a way that they are relatable to everyday life, which is the
Mhm.
biggest struggle
Mm.
as a
Mhm.
STEM teacher is how to relate it to everyday life,
Mhm.
then maybe we would fare a little bit better.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I do agree with that one. I think the Filipino society, meron tayong ano eh, we are very practical in such matters. So
Mm.
we have yet to tap that in our education system, really, in our modules or whatnot, to make it a bit
Mhm.
more practical.
Yeah.
Hey, education is about maximizing what exists, and what exists is that we are very
Yeah.
practical. We're a very practical society.
Yeah. If science and math were taught in such a way na how is it applied in practical life,
Mm.
hindi mas marami na siguro nakagets. Or maybe a lot of people would realize na, marunong na pala ako ng algebra. Kaya ko naman pala to eh. Hindi, iba lang, ang pangat na napakaturo sa akin kasi puro letra, puro ano eh. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Sokato, you know.
Yeah.
So you never thought of like being maybe an English teacher or like anything. So you stayed as a chemistry teacher. Like, what keeps you there?
I
Like,
don't like reading.
okay.
I don't read a lot. Like right now, I can see Borge. Like stacks and stacks of books.
Yeah.
You will find nothing at my table.
Mm.
I'm lazy at readings.
Mm.
Even back in when I was a student.
Mhm.
Kahit ngayon, parang I only read textbooks when I have to.
Okay.
Like, and I don't read for leisure.
Mm.
So, parang I don't think I would fare better as a literature or a humanities teacher.
So how do you
Growing up
learn then?
talaga,
Yeah.
I mean, I take in media. I watch a lot
Uh-huh.
of videos. I listen to a lot of things. I
Mhm.
still read at times, but
Mhm.
very, very seldomly. If like
Okay.
talagang interested ako sa topic,
Mhm.
then I might exert the time to read it. Pero it's just too slow for me. Like, siguro the part na rin ng pagiging STEM-minded ko is like, I want things to be quick,
Mhm.
to be
Mhm.
bite-sized, to be, and then I could learn the nuance later.
Uh-huh.
So, yun, parang growing up talaga, I've been better at computing things rather than, uh, you know, reading things or thinking things more
Mm.
philosophically. But of course, growing up, lalo na when I got into college and high school, ano eh, na-realize ko rin na intertwined sila. Like,
Mhm.
you can't really escape it. Lalo na sa science, na
Mhm.
philosophy of science is a big thing.
Yep.
Mm.
Well,
Borge?
yeah, I think I'll say another thing about the Philippine society. I think another general observation: we are
Mhm.
an audiovisual society.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think we should take advantage of that. Kaya nananalo mo na sa TikTok na pseudo-intellectuals kasi
Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
they're taking
Yes.
advantage of that.
colored.
Filipinos can easily absorb what they can see and what they can
Yeah.
hear rather than
And
what they can
sometimes,
read.
yeah,
Yung
sometimes it's
yung ano eh,
privilege.
yung wow appeal. Like we like that a lot. We want to be wowed. Uh,
Yeah. I suppose that's how our best moments in education is when we do wow them. You know, sometimes the song and dance. You ever
kaya,
see?
kaya,
Yeah.
kaya nga like
That-
okay, if you would ask students what is their most enjoyable part of science, they're not going to say the topic itself. They're going to say the lab experiments when things
Uh-huh.
blow up, or
Yeah,
when
I
things blow
agree.
up, or when things are on fire or electrocuted or whatever. Yun yung
Mhm.
masaya kasi syempre nakita ng bata eh. Pero you ask them what is their favorite topic, they're not gonna say chem, they're not gonna say math, they're not gonna
Mhm.
say like the bookish uh topics. No, they want the practical stuff.
Mhm. Speaking of that practicality, I actually appreciate that the application of scientific thinking to practical thinking. But I was wondering if you can, suppose, extend that to like maybe what would you, how would you imagine it would be important to, how important is scientific thinking or the things you're teaching perhaps in being better Filipino citizens or being better Filipinos? Do you ever think about that, as a part of nation building? Kumbaga?
I think about that a lot, especially now in this pandemic. Na
Mhm.
one of our the STEM community in the Philippines, I think one of the biggest frustrations is that
Mhm.
we could actually do pretty well in COVID response if we just focused on science, technology, and health.
Uh-huh.
We would be done. Okay, think about this. Okay, we've been given a home court advantage. We're an archipelago.
Mhm.
When the whole pandemic started, we have a natural advantage to not let it spread to
Yeah.
every single crevice of this country.
Uh-huh.
Because we are not one big island. We are
Mhm.
not one big landmass. We're made of 7,000 plus islands. And so
Mhm.
if at the very start our government said, okay, we're doing a travel ban, and
Mhm.
like hard ban from anyone mostly from China kasi doon naman nag-originate.
Ooh.
If we weren't so afraid of hurting their feelings
Mhm.
or being labeled as racist,
Yeah.
we would be done by now.
Yeah.
We would probably have a very great COVID response simply because of the home court advantage. And how do you get to that nuance? Through
Mhm.
science, to understanding that okay, the country is made up
Mhm.
of an archipelago,
Mhm.
and so because of that, segmented yes tayo in terms of society, but it provides a natural advantage to things like these.
Mhm.
Kasi hindi na kasing hindi rin kasing dali na kumalat yung
Mhm.
okay, so sabihin natin we missed that opportunity. Okay,
Mhm.
we could have still done a better response if we focused on like what the other countries are doing, mass testing, ramping up first of all mass testing, making it free. If
Mhm.
we made it free, people wouldn't be so afraid of getting a test. Kasi okay, kaya lang naman takot ng mga tao magpa-test kasi una, nowadays takot na there's a stigma of course
Yeah.
na okay ma-label ka na, uy shucks, meron siyang COVID, yeah, layo tayo sa kanya ganyan. But if we destigmatize it by making it free,
Mhm.
by not worrying where will I get 5,000 pesos to get a swab test.
Yeah.
Di sana we would have better statistics, like the nightly news statistics that we would hear would be
Mhm.
better given context na okay, umaabot nga tayo ng like nowadays thankfully it's just less than 5,000 cases, or I'm not sure, like I haven't checked, pero like it's less than 5 digits na per day.
Mhm.
Pero if we understood that, okay, because we've been doing a lot of tests, then in the context of that, okay, then we're doing actually really well.
Mhm.
So a lot of these things are rooted in science, technology, engineering, mathematics.
Mhm.
So I guess as a STEM teacher, what I hope to instill in my students is that yung etong pinaghihirapan nyo ngayon, marami siyang application talaga in real life. And I know it's hard to think of it very, very long term right now.
Mhm.
You guys are, high school students, but believe me,
Mm.
if you do decide to become a part of the STEM community,
Mhm.
you would be helping this country a lot
Mm.
in your own way as well.
Mm.
So yeah.
Eh, may dolomite naman.
Diyos ko.
Oh boy, that's a
Sakit sa,
wonderful answer.
literal na sakit sa bagayan. Diyos ko.
Mhm. So yeah, I definitely agree with you that it's not just this high up there. You know, it's very practical as you've
Yeah.
laid out. Anything else, Borge? Before
Yeah, I think that would be that summarizes it. I mean,
uh-huh.
but the thing is, ang problema kasi sa Pilipinas, I think there's a shaky relationship between ordinary citizens and the scientific community in the Philippines. There's a very shaky relationship.
We tend to be condescending pricks.
Yeah.
Okay.
And counter condescending naman din ng mga ordinary
Oh,
Pilipino.
condescending. Parang they don't
Yeah.
want, of course, they don't want to feel that they're dumb. So,
Yeah.
titira din sila.
So yeah, and the current regime just probably took advantage of that one without losing any legitimacy in the process.
Exactly.
You know, I was
Exactly.
wondering, like, people usually say that Philippines is an quote unquote anti-intellectual like society. It's not. We're pretty smart.
We're
Just
not.
we're just anti-asshole. Yeah.
Exactly.
Anti-intellectualism is anti-asshole. So I don't know. I suppose
And there's a very thin line between assholes and intellectuals as far as
Ooh.
the intellectuals that we know is concerned.
Oh.
There are actually asshole intellectuals and they're
That-
roaming around.
All right. Well, let's take it easy. We're not here to pick fights with them, you know. But let's move on to another topic, which is quite been going around in the news recently, particularly the like Deped and teachers. And recently there has been a policy. I'm sure you're well aware that public school teachers are not allowed to be quote unquote political or express their political views. And as a result, a lot of teaching groups and even party lists have said that, well, how can you expect us not to be political? Critical thinking is political. So I suppose we'd like to get your reaction to that, and perhaps we can also chime in that discussion. So what do you think, Sir Jay, about this?
First and foremost, I think I'm part of the people who think that everything is political. Most especially education. Kasi education is very, very much a big factor that affects the general populace. Everyone goes to school. So everyone who's ever been to school would know na parang malaki yung impact niya. So you can't separate it from politics because who are making the policies for the education sector? Syempre, yung mga binoto natin at kung ano yung sino mga in-appoint nila.
Right.
So it's hard. I wouldn't say, hindi na pala hard. It's nearly impossible to separate it.
Yeah.
At least in other aspects of society, medyo madali pang i-separate. Sabihin natin, kahit entertainment, medyo madali pang hiwalay kasi it's just to entertain the masses. Pero kung education, very, very hard.
Yeah.
Now, as for that particular directive, from what I understand, it's actually just a memo. And from what I understand, not much more enforceable than the code of ethics. Parang we are encouraged not to talk about it. We are encouraged not to be partisan.
Right.
But it cannot hamper our basic right in the Constitution, which is like our right to self-expression and to have biases in a way.
Yeah.
So I think whenever, and there's always that I'm sure you're aware of that quote na parang people who are neutral tend to side with the oppressor. I think it's a case of that na parang okay, so magpapaka-apolitical kami. Edi ang mananalo lang doon, ang like maging partida lang yan sa kung sino nasa posisyon. Kasi at least parang they're telling us not to give a counterpoint. Wherein in fact, especially in science, you have to see all sides of the argument, right? And it's not just two sides. It could be three, four. It's very multifaceted. Hindi siya dichotomous lang na okay, si ganito lang at si ganito ang magkalaban. Hindi lagi ganun. Both of them could be bad choices.
Yeah.
You don't have to pick one or the other. Both of them could be bad choices as well. So, ganun, parang Pero this actually comes at a time na like a few, I think this past week, parang this past week lang yata yun, or the week before, we had a faculty meeting
Mhm.
at work
Mm.
about this. Parang, and thankfully our boss did not hamper us to be political.
Mhm.
But parang I think he was just stressing na please do it academically.
Mhm.
Parang and understandable, we don't want to be just simply ranting na oh maka-pink kami, oh maka-BBM kami or whatever, right?
Mm.
We don't want parang wala hindi naman, wag lang daw ganon. Like
Uh-huh.
okay, you can talk about politics but frame it in the context of your lesson. Wag
Mhm.
naman yung tipong nagtuturo ako ng enzymes biglang kasalanan kasi yan ni Marcos.
May enzymatic
Talaga,
browning dahil kay Marcos.
enzymatic browning dahil kay Marcos. Medyo i-relate naman, no? Para, and quite understandable naman. And I think all teachers then parang there's a time and place for it,
Mhm.
but I don't like it where we shouldn't hamper teachers from voicing their political opinions because we are members of society. We all
Right.
have opinions. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
Borge?
Let's have. I'll probably just give a rejoinder to that one. So, but yes, hindi kasalanan ni Marcos sa enzymatic brown. So, naging brown ang saging mo, wag mo sisihin si Marcos. Pero,
we could blame him for other things, but not that particular thing.
Nag-brown yung saging ko.
Ni Marcos.
Hindi, pero, regarding, this is very curious since, again, I'm more careful with this one since I'm a political science professor. So, it takes extra care. I think, and again, I do believe that everything can be politicized. And it is really difficult right now to not politicize everything. I think the question that is facing teachers right now is how. So how to politicize a certain issue or a certain field. And it's also related with our understanding what politics is. So if we are to politicize education, if we are to teach, or if we are to relate something to political issues, I think we should look at politics not, again, I do agree with Sir Jay, and I think this is something shared by you, Matt. It's not supposed to be partisan. So we should not define political as being partisan. And we should, again, as Sir Jay said, look at a certain topic from different perspectives, to assume that you can look at a topic from different perspectives, from more than two perspectives. So I think if we are to teach politics and if we are to make education political, it is about teaching students how to be public-minded, not to be partisan, never to be partisan. I would go as just to piss off any leftist teachers listening to us right now. A teacher's political opinions really have no room. It doesn't have any room in the classroom. If conversation-wise, if a student asks kung anong stand mo sa ganitong issue, that's fine. But a teacher, I think, should facilitate discussion on a certain issue instead of just saying, "This is my opinion on this." Because we must accept that teachers are in a position of authority within the classroom. It's automatic. We can try to equalize it, but at the end of the day, it's a position of authority. And,
may power struggle din yan eh. Na parang, kung ano yung sabihin mo kasi na they would still base their opinion, lalo na sila because they're in their formative years. Kung ano sabihin mo, medyo malaki yung bearing na kahit na sabihin mo, hindi kaya naman nila mag-isip for themselves eh. You cannot assure that. So, kailangan medyo maingat din tayo. But I would, sige, tapusin yung muna, Verge.
Yeah, regarding that one, yung reaction nga nila. So, I think that since we're in a position of authority, there are these two possible reactions. They can either just swallow what we say, which is bad. Ano to, nakarinig lang swallow. Bumiti agad, no?
Edit. Okay.
They can swallow or they can actually just rebel against it. Kasi ganun yun eh. So, yung usual na tinuturo EDSA as Cory Aquino's saying. So, you now have a generation of young students actually rebelling against. So, which is weird. Young people are rebelling as pro-Marcoses. So, yun ang natin. Yung rebellious space ng mga bata ngayon maging pro-Marcos. I mean, what the hell? But that's the result of mishandling authority in the classroom. So, I think something for us to think about. We politicize, not to be partisan. We must reduce our own political opinions. We must leave it outside the classroom. But we must teach students how to be public-minded, how to be critical, how to assume that there are various perspectives looking at a certain issue, and how to roam around different perspectives. Yeah.
That being said, though, there are just some things that are like truths already. Like
Yeah.
overwhelming evidence would suggest na there
Mhm.
are things talaga na are not up for debate. Like for
Yeah.
example, the Marcoses and the martial law. I
Mhm.
like as much as you would want to be non-partisan and public minded in the classroom, there are just some things that they messed up our country,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
that's undeniable. So you can't frame it na parang okay, parang that's why I as much as I want to be open
Mm.
to students having their own political beliefs and all that.
Mhm.
That being said, if you are pro Marcos, medyo ibang tingin ko sa'yo because but it would depend also on the context. Like if I know that the student is misinformed or maybe not as aware of what happened back in the
Mhm.
day,
Mhm.
then education ang kasagutan nun.
Mm.
But if I know that they know what
Mm.
happened and yet they still support them, yeah,
Mhm.
medyo ibang usapan na yan na parang, okay, dude,
Yeah.
you're in the wrong. I don't care about
Mhm.
being quote unquote neutral. You're just dead wrong. So
Mhm.
Regarding that one, I'll share an experience. Probably you can give your reaction to this one regarding pro Marcos students. I think it's also a challenge for us teachers, really, to not only show different perspectives, but to also hold some different perspectives. Regarding pro Marcos students, I used to teach Machiavelli for Great Works, and again, I always encounter every time na may pro Marcos student dyan, every time.
na he was just
Eh,
Machiavellian, ganun.
Yeah, they know what Marcos did, yet they can still justify it. So what I do in class is, fine, sige. You don't want to criticize Marcos based on liberal democratic standards. Fine, you're autocratic. What if you compare Marcos with other dictators? Is he actually a good dictator? That would make them think. Sabi ko, ito mga usual arguments ko. First and foremost, if we are an archipelago, what do we need? They would say, we need the Navy. What did Marcos did for 20 years? He increased the army. That's why our flagship until Noy Noy's time is a World War II veteran kasi Marcos just didn't take care of the Navy. Even if sabi ko, alam mo, undergrad ka pa lang, alam mo na dapat Navy ang meron tayo, si Marcos hindi. Sabihin, tanga yun. So, and there's another argument which probably would piss you off, but then again, for discussion, sabihin ko, yes, Marcos killed people. Marcos killed thousands of people, but did Marcos kill the right people? I mean, the leaders were alive. Joko Arroyo died in old age. Danny Pimentel died of old age. Joma Season was captured. He's still alive right now. Kahit na si Ninoy, mamamatay na nga sa preso dahil sa heart condition, pinabayaan pa rin niya umalis sa bansa. Anong tawag mo dyan kay Marcos? Hindi ba tanga tawag dyan? So, my student...
Basically, even as a dictator, he was a shit one at that.
Yeah.
So, my student, my pro-Marcos students would actually say, even as a leader, Marcos is... So, they actually took a anti-Marcos position, but I leave them with their own values. But yeah, I think it's a challenge really for professors to actually try to explore different perspectives.
I never thought of it that way, actually. That was actually very interesting na kasi I'm more partial to the stance na, you know, pag pro Marcos talaga, like, hekis ka sa akin. Kasi, like, I've interacted with, you know, victims. I've had teachers who are victims, torture victims of martial law. And so, it's very much ingrained in us talaga na the whole like the whole period was just a dark time in our country. And no amount of infrastructure, no amount of CCP or anything like Metropolitan Theater or whatever na pinagawa ni Marcos would ever change that. Kasi he ballooned our debt. Hindi pa ako pinapanganak, may utang na ako. So, parang, and lalo na kayo, hindi pa kayo pinapanganak, hindi pa, parang, I'm referring to my students, hindi pa kayo pinapanganak, meron na kayong utang sa gobyerno. So, parang, and, you know, all these other metrics, all these like unemployment rose, yung, what do you call this, yung exchange rate, lumobo din, inflation, ganyan. So, these are undeniable truths. They're recorded. And the world recognized that he was a bad leader all in all. So those are non-negotiables to me. So pero like, okay, kung pro BPM ka, edi. Ewan ko sa'yo.
I suppose that's what they're trying to avoid, because if you look at people who are pro Marcos, it's either number of factors. Number one, their parents conditioned them to be pro Marcos, but number two,
Right.
also
Yeah, for
they
my
have been
case.
they have been educated in their schools. There are some schools that are teach an alternative history, which is Marcos was a good leader. In fact, I suppose I remember even in my old school, there was this one stray, I suppose, series of comments where it's like, what? Why don't you think? Like, do you think Marcos could be actually good? He did some good. Maybe he was trying to be provocative, but at the same time, it feels like, what's going on? Especially when I think it was grade 5, so we weren't really that used to like doubting a person of authority.
Yeah.
So I think that's what they're trying to avoid, but at the same time, educate when you say education talks to a lot of people at varying stages of development, so it should be calibrated. So having a blanket ban on like not being political, that would perhaps be beneficial for those in earlier primary education, but
Yeah.
with secondary and senior high school, I'm sure they're hungry for
Yeah.
answers,
Yeah.
especially when a lot of, I'm sure your students go to Twitter and they have these kinds of debates with strangers, so they should be
Yeah.
armed and informed about it. So
Honestly,
Mhm.
though, I don't think my students, because they're more concerned about Western ideas rather than
Oh
what's
well.
happening here because of the generation they have. But maalala ko lang, and I can never forget this, but I
Sure.
don't want to shame the person
Mhm.
who was involved here. Kasi when I was in high school,
Mm.
like all our batches, we knew of this particular teacher. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Christina Bawagan.
No, sorry.
But anyway, she's a teacher in Philippine Science High School, and she was one of the victims in back in martial law.
Oh.
And everyone respected her. Everyone knows her story, uh, and yet, like, and I can't believe I'm saying this, pero hindi ko na ipapangalanan ko sino, but we have a batchmate who is undeniably pro Marcos, and I'm like, after you've heard Mambo Agan's story, after you know about what happened, parang you still parang you still support them, parang ganyan. And from what we understand is because nakinabang siya. She was when I think indebted siya talaga to that family for giving her an education apparently back when she was in elementary. So may ganong factor na like some of these supporters are indebted to the Marcoses because nakinabang sila
Yep.
in a way, which is a weird way of saying na nakinabang sila from the Marcoses because pera natin yung ninakaw nila na ginagamit nila para makinabang ka. So that's technically you paying yourself.
Yeah.
So parang
Mhm.
ganun yung idea. But yung utang na loob that whole idea of utang na loob has messed up our society in a way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There are times where it's a good thing, but there are for most things, especially in things like these, and sige, baka people are thinking that we're just shitting on the Marcoses. The other candidates as well, they try to what do you call this to pull on that whole utang na loob thing. Kay Isko, he would always talk about how he was, a man of the people, na lumaki siya sa hirap sa Maynila, ganyan, ganyan, ganyan. So we're all just pulling at heartstrings here.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Regarding utang na loob, I think a necessary clarification, and I do agree na medyo, utang na loob in the Philippines is a bit, has provided adverse effects. Pero again, debt of gratitude, hindi lang naman tayong lipunan na may debt of gratitude.
Yeah.
Ang problema sa Pilipinas kasi, Filipinos to an extent are alienated from their tax. They don't see their taxes as something that they own. Kasi
Yeah.
kinukuha lang naman sa kanila yung mga consumer tax, hindi mo naman binabayaran directly. Yung income tax, tatapos
Kaltas
agad
na,
kaltas agad sa sweldo mo. Tapos, and you don't have direct access kung paano gagamitin yung tax. So, they're separated from the tax. So, one way for them to make sense of the taxes coming back to them is via utang na loob. So, may mas malalim na problema sa utang na loob, which is yung wala tayong access to tax.
Right,
So,
right.
nakuha na, wala na. Okay na,
Yeah,
utang na loob na lang,
you
utang na
didn't
loob
feel it
ibabalik nila. Utang na loob
Oh,
ibabalik nila.
that's true.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting threads branching out, but I
Mhm.
suppose for the sake of time, I suppose we
Yeah,
should
yeah.
start wrapping this up. But
Yeah.
I suppose to wrap this up, I want to ask. I suppose each of us should answer this. Um, well, as teacher, we're all teachers by profession and presumably by vocation,
Yep.
and so I suppose we should. I want us to perhaps reflect what, given the political polarization. So,
Mm.
what can we do better to further prepare students and for more productive political engagement? And at the
Mm.
same time, on another level, what can we ask for in the government for, or perhaps from the upcoming elections? What does education need from our government? I suppose there's a long list, but I suppose we can get to the
Yeah.
biggest one. So why don't we start with Sir Jay? So what should we do as teachers? Should we do better as teachers, and what should the government do better for education?
It's funny that you asked that now because so we're recording this late October, almost into November already, and by this time, just a context to our listeners, whatever timeline, like whenever you might be listening to this, uh, the government just released the new the quarantine guidelines, diba? For the
Mm.
next month
Yeah,
until from the 1st to the 15th of November
right.
2021. And alert level 3 pa rin ng NCR, and
Mm.
Mm.
basically what that means is that a lot of establishments are open except the damn schools.
Oh no.
So parang okay, it's hard it's hard for me to give like one answer na we should open the schools. That's for sure. Like, I think education is one of the only industries left that aren't open by now.
Okay.
Nauna pa ang mga sinihan, nauna pa ang museums and all that. I'm not saying that they're less important, but it's just that we're now like and I talked about this in one of my past episodes. Um by this time, I think the Philippines and Venezuela were the only countries in the world who have not opened schools since the start of the pandemic, or
Oh
at least
boy.
not have attempted to open schools
Yeah.
since the start of the pandemic.
Hmm.
That's almost 2 years worth of not opening schools.
Mm.
And so we should really work towards that. I think yung a more short term, to answer your question, Matt, more short term response would be, let's fix our health, our public health already,
Mm.
so that kids would be able to safely go back to school.
Mhm.
We've seen, like, recently we've seen and we've heard of the news naman na para magkakaroon na ng pilot testing in some Deped schools na they will try face-to-face classes,
Mhm.
limited face-to-face classes, and I'm watching that unfold with caution kasi syempre kinakabahan ako. Kids are disgusting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Parang they haven't seen their friends in 2 years. You can't tell them to socially distance
Yeah.
because obviously they would want to be with their friends and all that. So
Mhm.
we're watching that with caution. Hopefully it doesn't cause a surge in cases and
Case.
all that. Pero
Right.
yun, fix public health so that everything else can follow.
Mm.
Mhm.
Um, our government response towards the pandemic is that nagiging dichotomous na we have to balance between economics and public health. You don't have to
Mhm.
focus health first, because without a healthy society, babagsak at babagsak pa rin niya kahit na ilang beses bubuksan ng mga
Uh-huh.
ang mga
Mall.
establishments, mga mall,
Yeah.
ganyan. Magkakasakit sila. So
Mhm.
focus on public health first, so
Mhm.
that everyone, including schools, can
Mhm.
safely go back.
Right.
In a more long term, solution, I guess, siguro, and I wanted to simply say increase the budget for education, because
Mm.
education already has one of the biggest chunks in the national budget anyway. It's
Yes.
more of the utilization.
Mhm.
It's very it feels underutilized.
Mhm.
Ang laki-laki nga ng pondo, pero bakit hindi natin nararamdaman sa public schools?
Mhm.
Ba't hindi natin nararamdaman sa mga institutions?
Right.
So it's a matter of getting the money to where it's needed.
Yeah.
Um, yun nga, and ano rin yan eh, that's everything, infrastructure, materials, teacher training, itaas ang sahod, please lang, itaas yung
Mm-hmm.
sahod ng mga
Mm-hmm.
teacher.
Yeah.
Other members of society have higher salaries than we do, and yet they wouldn't be able to and this might sound mayabang, no, they wouldn't be able to exist without teachers.
Oh yeah.
So like every other profession in the world might not exist because kung walang teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's high time we value teachers as more than just giving them a chocolate on Teachers Day.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Give them tangible help, and
Right.
that starts with salaries.
Oh yeah, definitely. Borge.
Yeah, something we can do with the polarization first, and
Yeah.
advice with the education sector. Okay, regarding polarization, what we can do right now is, first and foremost, do not aggravate it.
You're already polarized, so just
yeah,
parang kalma lang,
no, no,
kalma lang kayo.
Yeah.
kalma lang, and that's a great challenge. I would be as radical to say that again. Let me repeat. Teachers who are itching to talk about their own politics in class, in the classroom, should
Me time for that.
yeah, there's a time for that. You wait for your students to ask about your
Mhm.
opinion, then you say yours. But do not preach. Just do not preach, because in preaching you create either fanatics or more hard-headed rebels. Kasi that's how you react to authority. That's basically how you react. Either you accept it fully, hence you create fanatics, or you resist it, you rebel. Kaya nagkakaroon ng mga batang BBM ngayon. So it's generations worth. So there's a challenge for us to reverse the cycle, not to aggravate the polarization. And something
Yeah.
that we can do with that one is to focus instead not on specific ideas, but to focus on this love of thinking. To provide a higher value to critical thinking, and not
Mhm.
critical thinking not in terms of criticizing a specific object, but critical thinking as a process,
Yeah.
Right.
which is far more difficult to teach but must be taught.
Mhm.
Kasi habit yan eh. We must build habits of thought in students, not habits of not specific values per se, the value of thinking, pero habits of thought eh. So mahirap gawin yan. So wag nating dagdagan yung polarization. So kumukulo na. Kung gusto niyo sumabog, sige, fine. Dagdagan niyo, okay lang.
Sige, magkaway tayo, bala kayo
I
dyan.
can watch everything explode. I would happily form a theory out of that one. Pero for practical purposes, for my fellow teachers, wag niyo nagdagdagan. So be as cool-headed as possible. And be the embodiment of critical thinking. So open yourself to criticism as well in the classroom, which is difficult to do, but must be done. Now,
Yeah.
regarding education, I agree with Sir Jay regarding utilization of funding.
Yeah.
But I would like to add, other than increasing salary, probably increase the prestige of
The teacher
being
profession.
teachers, of
Yeah.
being teachers. And one part of increasing the prestige of that one is to actually include intellectuals or the products of education, high education, in high government offices. So kung sino man gagawa ng political
In policy making.
yeah, in policy
Yeah.
making, to make them more visible in policy making. And I think some local government leaders already doing that to make academics more visible. Pero at national level, wala pa. We're stuck with the
Puro kasi mga sundalo eh. Tsaka mga pulis eh.
I don't know. My heart goes out to that. It's very it awakens something. I just remembered. I remember it's not only just one of the biggest chunks, but I think mandated by the Constitution, it should be the biggest allocation from our national budget, and it doesn't always.
Education.
Yeah, it doesn't always trickle down. In fact, expectedly so, it's also one of the most. The Deped is one of the most corrupt agencies.
paperwork kasi po
consistently.
talaga si
Yeah, it's the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Bureaucracy talaga eh.
Man, we know very well. And it's weird because I have students who their point is to in their class they're supposed to create a project to benefit or charity or social issues. Sometimes some of the projects is to raise money for a simple photocopy machine because their old public school does not have a photocopy machine to print modules, and they're mandating modules. Or some people there's one of the best projects that my students did was they managed to organize a webinar to teach public school teachers how to give online classes. They had a workshop for Google Meet and Zoom, and I was like, wow, you mean they don't know that? Like, isn't the Deped doing anything? It's like, no. It's like, oh my goodness. And you
'Di ba?
did that for them. So
Mm.
it's like, that's amazing. And I suppose that's a great thing about the students. They already have a public minded. They just observe and they want to act on it. But I suppose as one thing I can just say is, as teachers ourselves, is to lead by example, to
Mm.
try at the very least show, well, not without being bragging, but to show them that it is possible to care about politics and our society without necessarily being partisan. It's not enough to
Mm.
care about a candidate, it's also to care about solving problems,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and scientific thinking is necessary for solving
Mm.
problems. So simple as that. You don't have to, well, okay, of course you have to vote, but that's not the main thing about being a citizen.
That's
It's a
yeah, that's just one aspect of it. And yun nga,
Yeah.
just sorry to cut you off, Matt.
sure.
And
Go
just to
ahead.
add to that, no, I think teachers themselves have to extend the patience
Yeah.
Mm,
talaga. Kasi it sounds cliche, and I know we're running out of it as people, pero ano if you're going to be a teacher, you have to be patient.
mhm,
I have like I was just reminded of something I saw on Facebook a few weeks ago. Parang teacher siya na nagpapa-recite yata tapos walang sumasagot, and then
mhm,
ay minura-mura niya na yung mga estudyante. It was very
mhm,
awful.
Mm.
mhm.
Parang I couldn't stomach through the whole video.
Yeah.
But basically, we have to extend superhuman patience talaga
Mhm.
as teachers kasi
Right.
Mm.
it's just part of our job.
Yeah.
Mhm,
And if we can't handle it, then we have to think of something else to do with our lives. Kasi
mhm,
that's what teachers really need. Talaga
mhm,
is to be
Mm.
patient. Of course, that doesn't mean that we have to be infallible and like
right.
we have to vent out every once in a while. Pero
Mhm,
as teachers, we have to be patient and
Mm.
trust that the next generation of people in society would do better than what we do now.
mhm.
So
Yeah. So
I don't
kung
know.
yung mga mainit ang ulo, imbis na
Mhm.
magmura, walk out na lang. Yan na
no,
lang
walk
yan.
out na lang.
Walk out na lang.
Yeah.
Walk out na lang. Oh.
Iyan mo na yung klase. Sige.
Hindi
Like,
hindi naman disrespect pag hindi nakakasagot ba. Alam mo, talagang walang
yeah.
naisip. Which is, I'm guilty of that one at least once. Estudyante ko,
Walk
lahat
out.
talagang walang sumasagot. Okay, iwan ko na assignment, alis ako.
Yeah.
Kaya siya visiting ko pa sarili ko eh.
Mhm.
How I wish I could do that in high school though.
Yeah.
Kaya mahirap.
I don't think I can do that in high
Mm.
school.
I just want to say something, one last thing on teachers. That this particular society, not only do they teach, but they do a lot of things. Like sila, I think they're the frontliners, of course, as poll watchers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In
Utang na
terms
loob.
of elections.
Yan
So
pa.
it's like, and of course it makes sense. I think it's, well, there are anecdotes saying that they're the ones being, how you say, approached when it comes to like cheating and corruption. So of
Right, right.
course, if ever something happens with it, they're the ones that defend the ballots. So that's like, this society owes a lot to its teachers. So I suppose I'm up for board saying increase the prestige of teachers and
Yeah.
not just like
That's true.
yeah. So before we get to self-congratulatory as teachers, I want to thank again Sir Jay for this
Yeah.
wonderful
Thank you for
conversation,
having me. Yeah.
as usual. But
Sobrang saya.
before we actually end, we want to move to our final segment, which is recommendations, where all of us recommend a piece of culture, like a book or movie, or maybe even a new hobby that we picked up, just
Mm.
to share a piece of ourselves that is related to the topic, or maybe just we think that is useful to the listeners. So, as the guest, Sir Jay, we'd like to go first in recommending something
Yeah.
for this week. Yeah.
I have two things, and two things that I like doing, I guess. So the first one would be it's a show. It's called QI.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, QI.
Yeah.
It's a show on BBC,
Mhm,
but you can find episodes of it on YouTube.
mhm,
It's for those who don't know, QI is like a trivia panel show. So there's usually the host for the earlier seasons. It was Stephen Fry, and now
Stephen
it's Sandy
Fry.
Toksvig.
Mhm,
Both are really wonderful hosts, and then they have
yeah.
like a varying panel of guests,
Mhm,
except for one who is Alan Davis. Basically,
mhm,
they just talk about random trivia, and
mhm,
like that might sound boring in a sense, but they do it in such a way that it's actually entertaining.
Yeah.
And it's been running for like almost 20 seasons now, so they have a lot of material already, and they have already corrected some of the material in like in the earlier seasons, and that's
Yeah.
how it's evolving. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're really interested in various trivia, you should take a look at that QI, like
Mm-hmm.
the letters QI.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one would be to bike.
Bike.
I got
Yeah.
I got into biking this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I've always known how to bike when I was a kid, but like
Mm-hmm.
actually biking around, I've really enjoyed it. It's a great way to exercise. It's a great way of transportation. You know, and I could slowly feel that Metro Manila will hopefully be a lot more friendlier to cyclists talaga, kasi it's, well, I don't know, but of course there's still assholes on the road, pero
Right. Right.
and that's not to say that the whole cycling community is perfect
Mm.
either,
Mm-hmm.
but just in general, cycling is a great way to distress and to
Mm.
get around.
Yeah.
And one thing I learned from biking, Metro Manila is just not that big.
Oh.
It's pretty
Oh.
small.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems big because of the traffic.
Oh yeah.
So that's one thing
Mm.
you start to realize when you bike. The world becomes smaller. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, watch QI and get a bike.
Oh, those are two perfect recommendations. First on QI, one of when we were considering the titles for this podcast, one of the things that came to mind was QI. So maybe you should make it PI and let's make it political. So that's
Yeah, right.
one of
Yeah.
the things that we're considering. And the other thing about that, I just want to say that ang layo nakarating mo, like from north to south. I know it's like, oh, first you're in the north and now you're like south. So I'm like, wow, you reach a lot of places. So he knows
Yeah.
his shit, guys. So
Yeah.
yeah, he's a really good biker. Borge, what
Cyclists.
about you?
In Shanghai, the cyclists are the assholes. Munti ka
Careful.
naman
Okay.
nasagasana ako ng electric bike dun, putang.
Ay,
Alright.
Electric bike kasi tahimik, hindi mo alam kung
ay,
papagayin ka o
oo,
hindi.
that's true. That's true.
Mhm.
But anyway, for my recommendation, a book would be, well, first would be by, the title would be Thinking Without a Banister by Hannah Arendt.
Oh,
I think this
yeah.
is available on fully booked to those who can afford, or you can find it somewhere. But Thinking Without a Banister, I think some works in this one looks at how to think
Mhm.
beyond polarities, beyond the partisanship, just the intensity, the danger of thinking. You know, dangerous thinking is rare right now.
Mhm.
And it's usually misconstrued as thinking about dangerous things. No, thinking dangerously is about the process itself of pushing the limits, asking questions that you wouldn't dare ask before,
Mhm.
or tapping into topics that no one would dare ask. So this would be a good start. Hannah Arendt's Thinking Without a Banister. A second, since again, as I mentioned earlier on, Filipinos have an audiovisual culture.
Mhm.
So for any history teachers here who are listening, again, political science is my wife, philosophy is my mistress, history is actually my ex. So, and,
Okay.
and I would like to recommend the YouTube channel entitled World War II. Yeah, that's the title, World War II. So World War II, this history channel actually provides a week per week recreation or retackling of World War II stuff, and they have some special episodes on actually rare topics that I actually appreciate. That one of the episodes that I appreciate would be when they actually differentiated the governments of Stalin and Hitler in terms of the two different types of authoritarian states.
Yeah.
So they looked at it again without any inherent bias. They recognized the atrocities of each government, but they identified the differences and how it affected the conduct of a war. So yeah, this would be a good prototype in teaching history, and it's really fun to watch. Really fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm recommending that one to those history teachers na medyo tinatamad ng mag-lecture on
Yeah.
World War II. Yeah,
Tama yan, tama yan.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I only have one recommendation for this week, and a lot of my inspirational teachers, of course, come from like real teachers, but like really they come from like media, like teachers in media. I love teachers in media, and in TV shows. And one TV show that I'm recommending, and it's being renewed for another season. The new season's coming next month, I think. is Cobra Kai. I love Cobra Kai.
Cobra
It's
Kai, Cobra Kai.
oh, you know it. That's great. It's
Yeah.
actually, yeah, it's a sequel series to The Karate Kid,
Mhm.
wherein it focuses on the bad guy of The Karate Kid, the Johnny Lawrence, and of course Danny DeRusso, who is the titular Karate Kid. They're both, it focused on both of them eventually coming out of retirement into karate and putting up their own dojos. And you can see how both
Mhm.
develop their own styles and also have their own problems. You'd think that the good guy, Danny DeRusso, when he starts, he was teaching exactly like Mr. Miyagi, the legendary, of course, sensei, and he taught him everything, made him win the. But in fact, when he tried to teach exactly like Mr. Miyagi, he actually started failing. He couldn't. It doesn't work. So there's a lot of things that you can learn from it. Another thing with Johnny Lawrence, he also taught the way he was taught by Reese, the
Yeah.
bad guy from the first film, and he also failed. So the
Reese.
best, both of them, in a way, well, not really a spoiler, but
Mm.
they grew as teachers when they taught their own way, and it's so great the way that they the way that they learn their own, they incorporate their
Style.
own experiences and
Yeah.
their own styles in
Yeah.
teaching. It's a wonderful show to watch. It's very funny. It's
Mm.
very lovable. A lot of, even the
Excited na
kids,
ako
they
din
teach.
actually. It's like
Exactly.
I've been waiting for the next kasi I've watched it since the very start. So
Yeah.
and I've been updated to it. So I'm excited for saan pa yata yun? Sa December pa yata siya.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, sa Pasko pa yata or sa Bagong Taon. So
I, I think
yeah.
I think the guy for the ponytail is going to come back. I forgot his name, but he's from Karate
Terry
Kid 3.
Silver.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Terry Silver. Yeah, it's so exciting. So, but if you haven't watched it yet, please. It's a great show. Cobra Kai.
I probably will. I
Oh,
haven't.
Yeah,
now you
it's
will.
so good. It's so good. It's
Yeah.
so good.
Okay. So, Sir Jay, thank you again.
Maraming
Thank you
salamat.
very much.
What would you like to promote? Would you like to promote the podcast for our listeners?
Yeah, so thank you for having me, Matt and Borge. If you want to know more about my thoughts on education as a young millennial teacher, please check out the Pisara Tales. I'm part of the Pipe Network as well. So we're a network of podcasts that have great content as well. But yeah, the Pisara Tales, it's available on Spotify, Apple, Google, Anchor, wherever you get your podcasts. You can check out our link tree. It has all the links already to to my social media accounts, and we actually have a Facebook group called the Teachers Lounge. So you
Mm.
can check there for updates on the show, as well as just random stuff about education, news, memes, whatever.
Hmm.
So yeah, link tree linktr.ee/The Pisara Tales. So,
Mhm.
siguro papalagay ko na sa inyong
Yeah,
dalawa
yeah, yeah,
sa
yeah, yeah.
if
Yes.
okay lang. Yeah. Yeah,
We'll be.
so it has all the links there. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll
Thank you
be
very
putting.
much.
Yeah, we'll be putting all those links in the show notes. So, that's another great episode.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. So the PI podcast can also be found on YouTube, Anchor, and Spotify. If you have any questions, suggestions, or just messages, please send us an email at pipodcastph@gmail.com. But until the next episode,
Magandang gabi, mga ka-PI.